Don was the market director for Texas Cattle Feeders Association in Amarillo. He represented cattle feeders in Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. Before that, he was part of risk management at Aztec Cattle Company. Before that, he was a graduate of West Texas A&M University with a degree in ag business and ag economics. He spent a lot of time in the industry, all the way down from the feed yard level, all the way up to the market analyst, to the current, more research-based position of looking out into the future that he currently holds with Rabobank. He's currently vice president for Rabo Agri-Finance and Rabobank. We welcome Mr. Don Close. Let's give him a round of applause.
Good afternoon. I'm absolutely honored to be here this afternoon, and I want to acknowledge that two things that I've seen so far today that I found really encouraging. The first one was when we were in here this morning and got our explanation of the program over the next couple of days, and they asked for the number of young people to gather. I can tell you that I attend a lot of different cattle meetings across the country, and a lot of times when I walk into a room, I'll say, hey, you know what? It's not all old people. But then as I get to looking closer, virtually all of the young people I see in there either work for a bank or a pharmaceutical company. There aren't that many young producers. And to see this organization that is committed to that young people, that's cool. We have to have it. The other thing that I've seen today that really encouraged me was that I went to the breakout session this morning that was talking about what do we need to do to plan to expand. And it was in the tower, on the 6th floor of the tower, and it was a big room with chairs at two different angles, and the room was virtually full. And I thought, you know, that is really, really an encouraging sign that we have some opportunity for the future. If I were to go and give credit to all of the people that I've talked to in preparing for this presentation, I'd use up all my time. But I want to give a little bit of a story that Jason first called me, and it had to have been like the last week of April, first week of May. And I was at a sporting clay event just outside of Oklahoma City. And the reception where we were at, I was getting about every third word. And he was telling me that, he'd done his background work and he had these recommendations and that I was the guy for the job. And so, my team's due to shoot here any minute. I'd agree to anything, just get off the phone. The other thing I thought about was, that's a long ways off. I'll worry about it later. Well, okay, I make the commitment to be here today, and as I prepared, okay, I got to start thinking about this. And so the first thing that I did was I gave an evaluation of where I was at on this issue, what was my background and perspective. And to give you a little story, my grandfather was in the food brokerage business. And he was a part-time produce trader, and he taught me a lot. But said, you have never in your life seen a group of people who can go from a bullish perspective to a bearish perspective as you do a bunch of produce traders with a load of strawberries. When they first notice, those berries are starting to sweat. So clearly I started off with a very short-term perspective of how to spin around in the market. I then thought back quite a bit about my beginnings in the order buying business, and those, and this I think it happened back in the old days more than now. But those crazy guys that would buy cattle and not have them sold, and would get the cattle loaded, get them on I-35 North, and tell that trucker to call in every hour on the hour that we'll get them sold. Guilty. And then I started thinking about my earliest recollections of being in the commodity futures business, and I recalled day trading pork bellies. And then I thought, okay, as I've gone into the price outlook and economic side of it, and I got to thinking about, for the overwhelming share of my career, price outlook for cattle meant what was going to be the price of fat steers on Friday. A long-term outlook incorporated the next cattle on feed report that was 30 days away, and a cattle inventory report was just mind-boggling. And so I'm saying, here's my career history, my work habit, and you want me to talk about the market 10 years from now? I got a lot of work to do. So I did go to work. And part of the session this morning was talking about creating a business plan, providing a long-term outlook, and having goals and objectives that met not only the proprietor, but the family members as well. And I agree with that 100%. One of the people that I consulted with on working on this presentation was Jim Whitt. And Jim is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Jim was a veteran of the livestock pharmaceutical business for years and has a business. He writes a column in Calf News, but he has a business that is purpose unlimited. And he works with companies to build long-range plans. He works on succession plans, and he does a lot of good work. Now, those of you that are looking at assembling that business plan, there were several pointers that Jim made clear. The first one, he says, the tendency is, when you look at change, is to look in 5 to 10 year increments. And he said, that's not long enough. If you ask a group of people, what has changed in your business over the last 5 to 10 years, they just think back to a continuum of today. And they extend that 5 to 10 year framework forward, and they think about a continuum of today. He says, you have to go back and ask them, what has changed in your universe over the last 30 years? And he says, that forces them to break away. He says, if they think about all of the changes that have transpired in their lifetime and what will likely to change in the next 30 years, that puts them at the mindset of where they need to be. And he says, it's amazing how good a job people can do when you ask them to look about that. Now think about the last 30 years. That was pre-cable TV. That was pre-cell phones. Think of how much, all of the social networking. Think of the changes that we've had in automobiles. Now, move that 30 years forward. The last point that Jim brought out that I thought was very interesting, he discourages companies from having a mission statement. And the reason why he does that, he says, if you go into any organization and ask anybody, what's the mission statement of this company? And they say 1 in 10 can give you a partial answer at best. And he says, it's something about the social responsibility and longevity of the business. It has something to do with the happiness of the employees, and it has something to do with profitability and customer satisfaction. What he encourages to replace that with is, what is your purpose? Now, one other thing to back up just a step, he also, in that mission statement, he will not allow any line that pertains to profitability. Says it doesn't qualify. He says, if a company is not profitable, it is not capable of sustainability and long-term growth in order to meet the objective. So if you have those, what is your purpose? And if you define that purpose, you will find the drive that gets you out of bed in the morning. You will find the message that you can connect with your employees and customers, and it will give you the foundation for long-term growth. I think there's a lot of foundation to what he's saying. And say, as we go through this, think about that a little bit. Cattle inventory over we've got the smallest inventory we've had in better than 60 years. We're sitting here with total inventory like at 89 million. And as it came up in the discussion we had this morning, we're quickly to the point of critical mass. And we're to the point of critical mass in that we're risking the infrastructure that we need to rebuild the industry. Now, we started off this year, weekly cow slaughter was running roughly as much as 6% behind the same week a year ago in 2012. Cow slaughter was down. We had got to the cattle inventory report in January, showed beef replacement heifers retention up 2%, and that was encouraging. And okay, we've got to start here. Well, since that time, we've seen a huge recovery of cow slaughter, and it looks like with the placement patterns we've seen throughout the year that a lot of that 2% of those heifers that were intended for expansion have gone on into the feed yard. Now, one thing about cow slaughter this year that is critically important, if you look at the raw data, dairy cow slaughter year to date's up like 4.5% over a year ago. And it depends on just when we look at it, but beef cow slaughter is up 1.5% to 2%. Late in the fourth quarter last year, there was a cow processor in Quebec that closed, Levinoff Brothers packing facility in Quebec. Since that time, typically we will see an average of roughly 3,000 Canadian cows a week come into the U.S. Since the closure of the Levinoff facility, we've seen that weekly Canadian cow number increase up to the 6,000 to 8,000 head mark. So here's the thing. If we look at cow slaughter aggregated, it looks like we're still liquidating at a pretty aggressive pace. If you extract those Canadian cows out of the total mix and only look at U.S. cows of the total cow slaughter's up less than 1%. So we are seeing the opportunity to see more stabilization in cow numbers than what we had been thinking. One other point I'm going to make with this slide, and then I'm going to go on. If you compare the cow numbers in 2013 to 2003, and I take that 10-year time span simply to try to replicate the typical lifespan of a cow, and you look at the percentage of decline in cow numbers in Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico over that 10-year period. Cow numbers in Texas are down 27%. Cow numbers in Oklahoma are down 14%, and cow numbers in New Mexico are down 8%. Collectively, it's like a 24% decline. The U.S. collectively over that same period of time was only down 11%. And if you extract the cow slaughter out of the 3 states that I've just mentioned from the other continental U.S. states, that U.S. cow percentage decline over that 10-year period is only down 7%. The point that I'm trying to make with that before I move on is that the rate of liquidation and the impact of the drought in this area is certainly way more damaging and will cause much more rebuilding than what we've seen in the U.S. collectively. Annual beef production. Earlier this year, I spent the last part of March and all of April this year in Australia and New Zealand. And over that period of time, I think I did 25 different presentations, and in every one of those presentations, I would be asked the question, if U.S. cattle numbers have declined at the rate you guys publish, how on earth have you sustained beef production numbers at the rate you have? And I would start off with the politically correct answer that, genetic improvement, we're just making the cattle bigger. Invariably, that conversation would roll to beta agonist, and that, yep, we're using it, and yes, we endorse it. And I can tell you that from their perspective, we are wrong. But I can also tell you that the way that we've been able to sustain our annual beef production totals at virtually very nominal declines while our total cattle inventory has declined at the rate it has is, in recent years, has been the advent of beta agonist. Now, I would also point with this one, we're absolutely at that tipping point that we've used science and technology to its max. And if we were to see any additional decline in numbers, we're not going to be able to stimulate that production total to hold together while our numbers decline. This thing's rolling over. As Dr. Gill pointed out this morning, the ramifications that has in our infrastructure of cattle feeding facilities and beef processing facility, beef distribution facilities, we're at a critical mass. As I already said earlier, I get the opportunity to attend a lot of producer meetings and a lot of cattle. I speak at a lot of cattle meetings, and invariably, if I get a group of cattle people together, I will quickly overhear conversations go that beef is king of the center of the plate. We have absolutely the safest, tastiest, best product on the marketplace. Beef is king. And they talk about the new products that have been the results of the beef checkoff research, that we've got the flat iron, we've got the petite filet, we've got the new product that's patented through Oklahoma State, that the Vegas strip steak, how good things are. I think, really, how long are we going to continue to tell ourselves this story and believe in and convince each other that it's the truth? I look at this and I say, let's cut to the chase. What is the consumption of beef per capita? And there it is. And I look at that and I say, now go back to that beef is still king of the center of the plate conversation. Tell me where that's at. I don't see it. I recall these years here in the late 80s to early 90s, and when this per capita consumption calculation is used, beef is sold principally on a semi or boneless basis, and chicken is still sold primarily a bone-in product, at least it was at that time. And so we would make up all kinds of excuses, but yeah, if you factor the bone weight into that deal, it's really not true, and that, beef, we're going to get this, we've seen a short-term decline here because of numbers, it will be okay. It hasn't been okay. Currently, we're looking at per capita beef consumption about 56 to 57 pounds, and we've got total, and I put total broiler or poultry consumption here just to emphasize my point, but we've got total poultry consumption up here at pressing 100 pounds. Forever, as we have talked and looked at the consumption of animal proteins by species, and always the phenomenon has been just how flat that pork consumption has been over time. And it doesn't matter if we've got the sausage McMuffin breakfast, the traditional egg muffin, it doesn't matter how much bacon you slam on a cheeseburger, it was all pretty well stable. How many of you guys are open or at least secret fans of the Food and the Cooking channel? Some of the food stuff on Travel Channel? Yeah, me too. Look at the frequency with celebrity chefs using pork as their protein of choice. And that's not only the bacon phenom that we're currently seeing, but that's osso buco and pork hocks. It's sausage, cacciatore, all the processed sausage products. Where I'm trying to go with that is we're number 2. And if we're not careful here, we could be number 3. We got to wake up and smell the coffee, and we got to do something about it if we're going to salvage our industry. This was recently published with, and Neville Spear published this, but and I think this actually came out of part of the beef quality audit. But it's the millennial parents, chicken versus beef, the top 10 reasons cited for preference of preparing chicken versus beef. Look at that. Chicken can be prepared in a wide variety of ways. Beef can't. Chicken is easy to prepare. It's hard to grill a burger. My children prefer the taste of chicken. Okay. Chicken goes well with a wide variety of sides and other foods. The versatility of beef doesn't. Chicken is always a crowd pleaser. Steak isn't? My children love chicken nuggets or chicken fingers. I know how to prepare and serve chicken. Chicken's not expensive. Here's where I'm going to pull out of this. I found this slide to be extremely disturbing, not so much for the millennials that answered that survey, but the impact it's going to have on their children. And if we're creating those consumption habits in kids today, and this is the message they're getting from their parents, what's the consumption of those kids going to be, and what's that mean for our long-term consumption capabilities? This slide has been published quite a bit in the last few weeks. It was done from the Earth Policy Institute, but if you look at that, over the last 2 years, the tonnage of farmed fish in the world has exceeded beef. That's incredible. That's amazing. And, okay, what are we going to do to regain market share? Same theme I've been on. If you look at this slide, it looks at the price of fed steers across the bottom. It goes from $20 a hundred to $1.30, and the per capita beef consumption on the right side. And you can look at that downward slope and to the right, and with an R-square of a 0.70. And you can also look here at where we've seen fed steer price and consumption 2011, 12, and 13. We've got to stop the slide. Several weeks ago, I had the good fortune to spend a weekend fishing with Steve Fogelsong. And many of you will recognize that Steve Fogelsong was a past NCBA president. He has, his property is up on a bunch of old abandoned strip coal mines. And so he has all these lakes that were formed from the mining of this coal, and incredible fishing. But anyway, over the course of the weekend, we had just gone from choice cutout making a new all-time record high of 211, and the market had started to slip back. And Steve made the comment, or asked me the question, says, do you think that we have simply reached a plateau with a $1.30 cash steer and we will not be able to reach that $1.35 or $1.40 level? I didn't agree with him, and I thought we could do better, but I really wasn't comfortable with the answer that I gave him. So immediately when I got back to the office on Monday, I pulled this long-term price series. And if you look at this, I have every confidence in the world that given that price trend over time, that on nominal price, that not only has it a consistent uptrend line, but it has escalated in recent years. I have every confidence under the sun that we'll see $1.40. Unfortunately, if you look at it in a real price series, what's it going to get us? Now, I have a lot of problems with deflating price series, and take it by the CPI index, and there's so many other things that cause price movement and value of the currencies and all those things that I really am uncomfortable with it. But here's where we're at. If you look at this thing on nominal price, it's incredibly encouraging. But if you look at it in real price series, and we're sitting here basically 40 cents, a hundredweight, 45, 50, man, we got a lot of work to do. When in preparing for this, I wore out the internet trying to find a picture of the old billboard with the Avis Rent-A-Car that had "We're number 2 and we try harder." I was able to find one of their print ads, and when I pulled this out of here, this is exactly where we're at with the beef industry. Why should people buy our product? Because we're number 2, we want to regain number 1, and in order to accomplish that goal, we're going to have to try harder. And I think it was very successful for Avis. I'm embarrassed to say when I got to the airport yesterday and jumped in a rental car that I took hers. But it's a great ad campaign, and it's a great message. Okay, I'm going to move on. If many of you in this room that were essentially all of an age group, and you will think back, what were the greatest fears of our generation? And you think about after the Cold War subsided, or even before the Cold War subsided, and we kind of quit worrying of sending our elementary school kids under the desk and holding their hands over their head, preparing for a nuclear attack, what was the biggest issue? Shortage of oil. Late last week, the chief economist for OPEC delivered a message to the OPEC ministers that given the rate of oil production in the United States and in North America, and the self-dependence of North America on oil, that OPEC will not be able to pump the quantity of oil that they had targeted, nor will they be able to sell oil at the price level that they had hoped to get. Where I'm trying to go with this, if you take everything that we went through, the gas lines, the Carter administration, the odd even gas or license plate numbers to buy gas, all of those things will dwarf in relationship to the battle that we're going to have for water. As you're working on your long-term plan and you think about what can I do to preserve the sustainability and the purpose of my operation, don't have that thought process or that conversation without having a water sustainability plan in that. Jason said talked about the years that I spent in the North Panhandle and the years I spent at Texas Cattle Feeders, and I can tell you, I was there and observed the lowering of the Ogallala water aquifer and that loss of water on the South Plains. I've seen reports of the decline in the water table in the North Plains. We're seeing water restrictions being placed on irrigation water throughout western Kansas into southern Nebraska. The irony of this, I spent the weekend at the Ag Media Summit is going on this week in Buffalo, New York, and I was there over the weekend. I flew down from Buffalo yesterday. Saturday, I was right there looking at Niagara Falls. And to see all of that water is, I'm trying to think how many gallons a minute are going off of that. That water is dropping at 36 miles an hour. And it's nonstop. And it is so gorgeously beautiful. If you come spend any time with all of us having, or virtually everyone in this room, in arid and semi-arid areas, it's just, you think, what could we do if we had access to that water? But again, water, keep in mind water. Recently, this work was done by the Kinder Institute of Urban Research that's at Rice University. And I first caught wind of this I was driving home one night and it was on National Public Radio. And the crux of this story is that Houston is the most ethnically diverse city in the United States. And the growth in not only the Hispanic population, but the Asian population is, clearly hands down over other areas in the United States. And the bottom line of this is, they said that being the most ethnic diverse city in the United States, you can take Houston as a roadmap, and what you see in Houston today will be the ethnic makeup of Texas within 10 to 15 years. And it will be the ethnic makeup of the United States in the next 30 years. I found that fascinating. And I was thinking about demographics, and I said, okay, every time I get into a demographics conversation, we talk about the aging of America and how much we eat less. If you take that population mix of the future and look at the eating habits of both of those cultures, how much protein do you see on either of those tables? Now, I think that we still have the opportunity for growth. I think that population growth and that, but again, if we don't think about the beef industry in a traditional classic mindset. our consumer base is changing at a very rapid pace, and it's going to have some dynamic impacts on our total consumption patterns into the future. This slide came up the other day, and if you look at this one, 28% of the US population is within the confines of that triangle. And I've seen the data years ago, and I didn't have the time to really flesh it out, but if you take the protein consumption of that population in that triangle, you take the average household income, you take the impact of cooler weather and winter impact, I think you could safely say that total US beef consumption within that triangle is going to be in excess of 30%. And so why I threw that slide in there is, the other one is that 80% of the US population lives within a 2-hour drive of the coast. As I bring that up and we think that those of us that live out there in the outback, we think and we use it as our production and distribution centers. We got to think about where our customers are and what their conditions are. All the years I was in Amarillo, and we'd get the Wednesday advertising sheet in the Amarillo Globe News for the United Supermarkets, was the big chain there in town. And somebody would want to make a huge issue out of the fact that United had choice ribeyes on sale for $8.50 a pound. Amarillo's maybe 100,000. I said, what difference does it make? You know, what's the price of ribeyes in New York City, in Boston, in Chicago, LA, San Diego? That's where we need to monitor those consumer changes and prices that those consumers are facing. I went online and started just fishing and looking for how many I would enter for animal welfare and animal rights. And how many of them were there? There was page after page after page, and there was, a lot of state associations, a lot of city organizations, and these were the major ones. I stopped counting at 75. Certainly, some of these are more familiar and more objectionable than others, but they're not going to go away, folks. What are we going to do? We can continue to go down the avenue that we've gone, and the battle lines are drawn, and we're going to fight them at tooth and nail. And there are just too many of them. They're too diverse, and they're coming at us from too many sides to just stonewall the argument. We have to find a way to come to the table and come to terms. I made this comment to Steve Meyer is a very well-known economist in the pork industry and a very good friend of mine. And I made this conversation to Steve one day while we were on the phone. And Steve just is very wise, and he just started to chuckle. He said, Don, and my comment to Steve was, I just want to call them up, ask to sit down and ask them the question, what is it that you want? Explain your side of the story to me. Steve's immediate response was, Don, they don't want to sit down with you. They're winning. And you know what? He's right. They don't. But we've got to find a way. The other thing is that the beef industry has, whether it be beta agonist, whether it be part of the whole BSE event, hormones, you name it, we have forever relied upon the defense of it is sound science and technology, and we defend it. That line has become so stale, that dog don't hunt no more. We've got to come up with a responsive answer to these consumer groups and activist groups when they ask a question, and we must have the transparency and the confidence in our industry to show them what we're doing and explain why we're doing what we're doing. Consumer relations. Beef industry has a great story. Go tell it. Beef production does not end at the ranch gate. Too many times we've become a disjointed industry, and a cow-calf producer will have the perspective that when he loads up that set of calves in the fall, that truck leaves his gate, he gets a wire transfer from the buyer's bank, he's done. You're not done. You're connected to that animal and its story throughout its production process and consumption. Consumer interest in where their food comes from is only going to increase. Be ready to explain it. Producers showcasing their product sends a far, far stronger message than any association representation or celebrity endorsements. Nobody in the world can tell your story better than you can, whether it's blogging, whether it's speaking to small groups, whether it's talking to your kids and why they shouldn't eat the chicken fingers. Tell the story, please. Promotional segmentation and between packers. What I'm trying to talk about there is there's always been a mindset that the livestock industry had a promotional PR piece that basically went through the sale of the cattle, and it was too many cattle feeders have the perspective of, I sell cattle, not beef. They wanted to disengage from the promotion process. That barrier will fall. It will at least come down. And there will be much more unity between packers, processors, distributors, and promotional segmentation. I recently was at the California and Arizona Cattle Feeders Convention, and they had a regional beef distributor and wholesaler in the area that catered to the celebrity chef market in California. He had lined up a group of producers that were willing to go with him on sales calls. Sales went through the roof. And the conviction that those producers told their story and their product, those chefs just eat it up. They in turn can go tell that to their customer that's ordering at the table. Tell the story. All right. All right. I'm going to tell you straight up that, I'm sorry, the question or the comment was made about Cool, and that he was not in line with the NCBA position about being against Cool, and thinks that we must have implementation of country of origin labeling in order to adequately explain our product. And I'm going to tell you straight up, on that point, we do not agree. I think it's a North American market, and I think that we need to work towards that end goal. On target of beef promotion to customers and potential customers, there's some great work being done, and it takes beef users and divides them in thirds. And it takes the non-beef users, it takes the moderate users and heavy users. And it looks at those people that, and I had really been troubled with, how do we get that message out there? And the bottom line of this research is the people who absolutely will not use your product, no matter how much effort you spend at sales and promotion, you're not going to get them to consume meaningful quantities of the product. The people who are avid users of your product, they don't need to be sold. They're already sold. They're going to buy it. That enables us to focus those promotional and research dollars on those moderate to mid-range users that we can get the biggest bang for our buck. Marketing practices. Over the next 10 years on seed stock producers, I suspect that we will see stronger links with the seed stock producers into the producer cow-calf people. I think we'll see links on inline breeding, even different crossbreeding programs, but links of tying that relationship tighter together. On the marketing of commercial cows, and you take the processing market, and you take just the sale of cows, that's really pretty doggone transparent. And in that light, I don't know that we'll see that one change a great deal in the next 10 years. Feeder cattle markets, I think we'll see more pay for performance. And I think what I'm saying with that is we'll see calves trade at a base price at the ranch with a setting goals and objectives. And as those cattle go through the feeding process, if they meet those goals and objectives, the producer would in turn be due for a share of that escalated value. I would also say that if you take the work that's been done that shows the, depending on whose work you're looking at, but $200 to $400 a head difference in carcass value between animals, because of the excess capacity in the feed yard sector today that's estimated to be at roughly 25%, cattle feeders have no choice but to bid away all of their margins to get a cattle supply. As we see contraction in the industry and see that become more in balance, I think that while it's transparent, I think the degree of inefficiency in the marketplace in the feeder cattle is probably the widest of any sector out there. But we've got to get to a balance of feed yard capacity before we can ever address that point. I know you cow-calf people are going to be really in love with me over that perspective. Fed cattle. Cash sales in the TCFA area have eroded to recent weeks have been as little as from 1.5% to 5% of total volume transferred. There's been, from the time that I was still at cattle feeders and through today and now with NCBA, there is a number of working groups working at what do we do for price discovery. That cash market has eroded to a point that it's gone. I don't know if it's good, it's bad, I wish it hadn't happened, but I don't think it's the end of the world. But clearly what's taken place there and has driven that down to the low levels it is was largely the catalyst of the use of beta agonist and the necessity that those guys have for a specific rail time frame for a rail slot. The other is, I talked with a DVM that was telling me that, okay, if antibiotics become more constrained, the likelihood of seeing a super time release bolus, that instead of an injection, an animal will be given a bolus upon the processing time, and that the slow time release of that will provide anti-infection, that's an interesting concept. Castration and dehorning is clearly under scrutiny, will become more so, could be required at a much younger age without any kind of anesthetic. Downer cattle will not be accepted. And when I showed this slide set to a friend of mine, he said, "Don, you need to be real careful with that comment because that's already the law." Yeah, I know. But how many times have you been watching the 6 o'clock news and watched that same Holstein cow picked up with that forklift and given as representation of our industry? And how many times do we walk in on a given day and see the latest news report from an undercover filming done within some kind of CAFO unit? It might be the law, but it hasn't gone away. We've got to handle those downer cattle at an earlier point in time or dispose of them, no exceptions. All right, this slide, I'm going to try to get through this. This one is the prospects for future cow expansion, and what it is, the beef cow per acre by county. And if you take Brian's presentation and that dryness in the west, where I'm coming with this one is, I used to talk to my guys and I would draw a line from basically Dallas, St. Louis, right up through there. And I would just hammer on them that I don't want any cattle bought east of that line. I want cattle bought from me from out here. You can see the map. You can look at the carrying capacity. You can give me the argument that these are largely small independent producers with no real unification. I think the growth industry for our cow-calf herd is going to be over here. And I know from conversations I'm having with some producer groups, the networking and linking of some of these herds collectively to assemble larger marketing groups is going to grow. Specialty products and niche markets. You can read down through the list. This used to just drive me absolutely crazy. And it wasn't that I'm opposed to any of those products. My opposition was that every time I listened to somebody champion any one of these products, they were by default suggesting that commodity product was inferior. That's not true. Now, again, I was at a presentation recently, and this was the topic. And the speaker at the time said, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. If we're championing and advocating the use of beef in whatever the format, let's support it. And while I still am not, I don't know that I'm 100%, I'm way closer. I think it doesn't matter. Get over it. The alternative business model. Cattle feeding in this country was developed on a base of $2.50 corn. Currently, cattle feeders have suffered the longest string of losses in excess of $150 a head in history. We manage all of these cattle as if they were destined for the center of the plate at Morton's. 50% of beef consumption is in some form of ground product. Now, I didn't include it in here, but if you will overlay the price of the choice cutout and 90 CL trimmings, they overlay to the tick. And in fact, over the last 2 to 3 years, the price of 90s has exceeded the price of choice cutout. We've got to we've got to look at something to lower our cost of production on the length of feeding period that we have on these animals. We've got to stop the losses. We've got to better manage those cattle, and I'm talking about that even at calving time or at sales time, distinguishing take the body scores, genetic profile, what's the characteristics of that calf, and designate it for a specific end-use market. Where I'm going with this is the top end of the top end of choice and better. All of our DNA tracking work that is doing tremendous work, all of the cloning work that's going on improves the quality of the top end of the animals. That's great. Let's go for it. On the other half to 2/3 of that supply, if 50% of our consumption is some form of ground beef, let's target that animal for that. Let's put him on a less energy-intensive diet. Could lengthen the length of his growth or feeding period. But when he's finished, we target an animal that you can strip the rib and the loin out of that would go to the retail sector, and the balance of that carcass grind to an 85% blend. We would better meet what our supply is with the end use of consumers, and we can potentially take cost out of the system in the process. I'm going to hit on a couple of more slides here, and then I'm going to wrap this up. There are some good things going on, and I know that this slide shows the power of aggregating numbers, but you can look at the black, green, and purple lines are the 5, 10, and 15-year weekly pasture and range condition scores. You can see the gray line there is when South Texas was dealing with such a tragic impact of drought, how it declined at the U.S. numbers, and then you can see where in 2012 just how bad that drought range and pasture conditions were. Look where we're at. we're back to the historical norm and showing indications of going better than the historical average. I told you I was in Niagara Falls and Buffalo over the weekend, and I made special point to sit by a window yesterday and with few exceptions was able to watch the ground over most of that flight, and it's green. Now, Buffalo to New York to St. Louis, Missouri, when's it not green? But, and I know I'm talking about, again, about aggregated numbers, but I think there's absolutely solid improvement here, and the opportunity that we are seeing recovery and have the forage prospects to expand our industry. This is the last slide I'm going to have, and if you will look at the red meat consumption, this is beef and pork together, and you can look at that decline over from 1960 forward, and we already talked about that early on. But look at the blue line is the obesity or the BMI index of adults that's greater than 30. And I kept harping on and championing that we've got a great story to tell, let's go tell it. I don't know how many times we've seen news reports that try to make links between the obesity rate and red meat consumption. It's not true. There's a story to tell. Look at all the low-carb diets. Look at the Atkins diet. The reason they work is not because people get fat from eating animal protein. It's carbs. Okay. The time's now, folks. Cattlemen, you have a great industry steeped in heritage and tradition. Enjoy, take advantage of it, capitalize on it, save it. You got a great product. Let's convince consumers. You got a great story to tell, as I've made several times. Tell the story. It's time to think outside the box and reinvent industry on the areas that need reinvented. There's still time to retool and rebuild. It's still our choice, and there's still time. Let's do something about it. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Thank you.